Document number 7 is from Camp LeJeune. It was the Naval Medical Field Research Laboratory at Camp LeJeune, and that's dated 1 August 1970. And it talks about the entomology division of this laboratory and what they're using. And it says all items of supply for the control of pests are considered to be standard stock if they appear in the federal stock catalogs. Document number 8 is a snapshot found at NARA of the Federal Supply Catalog for 1971. Federal Stock Catalog Group number 68 is the chemicals and chemical products. This was dated 1 April 1971. And then inside the catalog is Herbicide Orange with the nbutyl ester. So remember that the memorandum that we just looked at said that anything within the federal stock catalog was standard issue and anyone could order it, and people did from all over the world. Document number 9 is Army Environmental Hygiene Agency Aberdeen Proving Ground when they came down and did some environmental sampling in the Panama Canal Zone, December 1976. And in this document, they found all kinds of chemicals in the soil. And within this report, they found that in the Panama Canal Zone, they tested Corazol and Fort Davis. In fact, when they came down in December 76, I actually lived there at Fort Davis with my husband. And they said that they found chloridane, DDT, insecticides, pesticides. It says how many gallons they used there for calendar year 75. This is what this is. This is use data. Okay, Panama Canal Zone selected pesticide use data for calendar 75. So the government said they kept no records of spraying in Panama, yet they were able to put together this pesticide use data for calendar year 75. I wonder if there's any other pesticide monitoring special studies. I don't believe there are, because they didn't start looking until the 70s, because that's when they found out that there could be an issue with using these kinds of chemicals. In this report also it says, number 1 there, in contrast to a random sample of CONUS installations, the use of survey and supervision in pest management operations and pesticide application appears to be above average in the Canal Zone. So we got more pesticide use in the Canal Zone than in the United States. It says in this report, number C there, the pesticides reported used for these 2 Canal Zone installations in calendar year 75 ranged from persistent chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides, organ phosphorus and carbonate insecticides, chlorphenoxy, that's 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, and uracil herbicides. So we were exposed to many things all at once. Document number 10 is a report paid for by the VA under contract. Investigation into tactical and commercial herbicides for the Compensation Service, Department of Veterans Affairs, written by Alvin Young Consulting and Dr. Alvin Young, PhD, and Christian Young, I think his son, October 2013. He says commercial applicators would never have selected the nbutyl ester formulation of 2,4-D or 2,4,5-T for weed or brush control because of the problems associated with volatility and drift. But they did not know until 1970 that there was even an issue with dioxin when they had the emergency meeting between Kissinger and Nixon. So the N-butyl ester has been around since the 1930s, and the USDA has used it routinely, and so has the world. And to say that the commercial applicators would never have selected the N-butyl ester doesn't make any sense. He says on page 4 that the butyl formulations were not commercially available. And yet, in the specifications for 2,4,5-T in 1957, they were available. He says in this report that the directives by the Department of Defense gave the Armed Forces Pest Control Board, the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, the authority to set pest management policy applicable for all Department of Defense pest management activities in any unit at any time and any place, even when conducted by contract operations. That's correct. As we saw by the DoD, said that in 1959 that there was no difference between the commercial and the military use of these items. And we saw that the Armed Forces Pest Control Board said that in 1971 that anything in the federal stock catalog could be used by any facility anywhere. And we know that the two are the same because Herbicide Orange was in the federal stock catalog to be used by any federal facility. He says here the Agent Orange Act of 1991, and he says that a veteran shall be presumed to have been exposed to a herbicide agent containing dioxin or 2,4-D acid or other chemical compound in a herbicide agent. For purposes of this section, the term herbicide agent means a chemical in a herbicide used in support of the United States and allied military operations in the Republic of Vietnam during the Vietnam era. Well, those chemicals, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, are shown shipped through the U.S. Commerce by the Pesticide Review folks and also shipped to Panama. In the evaluation of the tactical and commercial herbicides, he says both tactical and commercial herbicides were routinely used in Vietnam that contained 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T herbicides. He says Agent Orange from 65 to 1970 contained N-butyl 2,4-D 50% and N-butyl 2,4,5-T 50%. It was 50-50, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. N-butyl ester was available in 1957. He also says in his report the contaminant TCDD, which is the dioxin that caused the diseases that we suffer from, says it should be noted that TCDD was always a contaminant of 2,4,5-T and other products made from trichlorophenol. In his report, he says, thus, the historical records and studies by the NIOSH and the USAF Occupational and Environmental Health Laboratory confirmed that the levels of TCDD contamination found in the 2,4,5-T used in tactical herbicides and commercial herbicides were the same. For instance, as no data were found that indicated that the 2,4,5-T in tactical herbicides contained greater levels of TCDD than their commercial counterpart. Then why in the world is the VA not recognizing the 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T containing the same dioxin or greater levels of dioxin that could have harmed the Panama veteran? The conclusion in his report, the dioxin concentrations in 2,4,5-T herbicide used in tactical herbicides were no different than the level of TCDD in the 2,4,5-T herbicide used in commercial herbicides. Document number 11 is a cablegram to the embassy in Panama from the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, and it tells Panama the 2,4,5-T technical butyl ester, which is what we saw shipped on the FT410s, the technical butyl 2,4,5-T, The 400 metric tons that's sitting there in Panama, do not ship it on to Cuba because we're not interested in it being shipped to Cuba. Document number 12 is how the United States agricultural herbicides became military and environmental chemical weapons, the historical and residual effects. That 2,4-D was combined with 2,4,5-T and the contaminant dioxin TCDD, the herbicide Agent Orange, was formulated. Agent Orange was used during the Vietnam War, was a synthetic plant growth regulator. Remember those words, synthetic plant growth regulator, because in 1977, we see 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T shipping till December of 77, and in 1978, the item started to be called, in the chemical section anyway, synthetic, not synthetic, that wasn't the word, started to be called plant growth regulators. So there were herbicides, there were 2,4-D, and there was something called plant growth regulators starting to ship in 1978 to Panama. The other thing I wanted to point out in this paper, and if you haven't read this already, the dioxin half-life in the soil can last 50 to 100 years or more. And especially in a type of soil and water environment, Panama, it can last quite a while.